Welcome to the Peace is Possible podcast, a space for real talk on healing, leadership, and conscious change. I'm Eva Dalak, founder of Peace Activation and your host. Each episode brings you insights and tools to help you live and lead from a place of inner peace and ripple that peace outward. Tune in, reflect, activate. Subscribe whenever you listen to podcasts and visit peaceactivation.org to learn more. Hello, dear Elana. So good to see
Hello.
you. Welcome to the Peace is Possible podcast. That,
Peace is possible.
yes,
Optimistic. I like that.
I do, and it's often hard. But yeah, I would love for you to introduce yourself for our listener.
Sure. My name is Elana Stockman, and I'm an anthropologist and a writer, researcher, activist. I work with a lot of women's organizations on development and strategic planning and vision, and most recently a podcaster. And that's how we met. Well, we met before. You and I met through Forum 1325, promoting women in leadership positions and everything having to do with peace and security. And then you and I did a podcast for a while. 3 seasons, I think we did together.
Women Ending War.
Women Ending War. So that was a privilege. And we had some really amazing moments. And I learned so much from you. And I feel like the process has created something indelible in me, like something really powerful in me in learning how to have hard conversations in hard circumstances and come out with love and friendship and come out intact from it. Yeah, I learned many things from you, Emma.
Thank you, Elena. Same here. Same
I
here.
just want to say, I quote you like a lot. There are a whole bunch of things that, like, I find myself quoting you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I must admit that Peace is Possible podcast wouldn't have been possible without you and your inspiration. So it's go back and forth. And yeah, this 3 season we did gave me also the confidence of, oh, I actually want to do something on the positivity of that peace is possible, that really before even ending, like women ending wars held for me something so special around women's role in this ongoing crisis, and I really wanted to promote that. But at the same time, I felt there was a voice in me that wanted to say, yeah, but there's also other voices of men and other perspective around that peace is possible. And so I'm very excited to have this conversation with you, because that's how also a lot of our conversation stemmed from, like just checking in on each other, and from that coming to speak towards any of what's happening right now. So how are you? Let's start there.
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm okay. It's complicated how I'm like, because on the one hand, to a certain extent, parts of the war in Gaza are over, right? We're supposed to be in ceasefire. And actually, most of the hostages are back. All the living hostages are back. And from an Israeli perspective, that's definitely a kind of relief. Like, I only realized after the hostages were returned how much like I hadn't breathed in 2 years. I was like, because the second you start to imagine, what they were going through, you can't live normally. You can't just go to the supermarket and say, hey, how are you? It's like you're living in this frozenness. So that happened. And that was like, so I do feel like I'm breathing a little bit better. But at the same time, it's fake, because the ceasefire is fake. Because for the people in Gaza, there is no real ceasefire. I mean, our friend Yara, you introduced me to, who I try really hard to stay in touch with, she doesn't have any reprieve. There's no reprieve. And then you also the damage. Today there was I shared this on Facebook. Israel brought in 12 reporters, foreign reporters, into Gaza for the first time in 2 years. And all is devastation. It's just devastation. And then when you start to think about it more, you know what that rubble is. That rubble is people's houses that may or may not come back. You don't know where those people are, where they're living, how they're living. There's also bodies in there. I mean, when 20-story building comes down, so you're worried about bodies. The rubble has bodies. The rubble has explosive materials, and there's so much of it. So first of all, the ceasefire isn't over, and Israel's still bombing, and also Hamas is still there, doing what Hamas does, and that's all still happening. And it's what has happened in these last 2 years and why has it happened? And is it going to be any better or worse? I mean, now maybe it's worse. I think now maybe we are all worse off now than we were 2 years ago. So it's weird. This thing that, oh, we're at a ceasefire now is like surreal. It's surreal because it's such a lie. It's like Orwellian when, truth is a lie and and up is down. It's weird. It's weird. So I'm trying to figure that out. Like I'm trying to figure out how on the one hand, I do have a sense of relief. There is a sense of, oh, okay, the war is over now. But it's like, what? Why do I feel that way? And also like, what now? What now? What are all these people who, through this podcast and just through work, of working with lots of people who are very eager to create peace and create a new reality. I mean, I've worked with and spoken with so many amazing people who have that belief and are dedicating their lives to that. And now it's like, okay, now what? Like, now what's happening? Like, how is that going to happen? Practically speaking, like, what is happening now? So I feel like it is like the next chapter of things, less clear for me about how and what. That's how I am. How about you, Eva? How are you?
Thank you, Ilana. I feel like you're speaking to the dissonance of the field, the dissonance between what is said and what is practiced. And for me, I just feel this dissonance. I feel like, how can I tune into my inner reality that is an anchor to be able to view what's happening as what is happening versus what is being told to us about what is
Yeah.
happening. There's such a
Yeah.
dissonance and confusion, like a real mixture of confusion and dissonance of, oh, we have peace. And the reality that you just described and that I hear from my own family that are in Gaza or in Israel. And I think that it's really hard to hold a truth right now that peace is possible. It's hard even to say the word peace in the
Mhm.
context of what's happening right now in Gaza, in the West Bank, with all the settler violence. It's like, that's a joke. So for me, it's harder and harder to hold that vision of peace is possible. And that's part of the reason why I do this podcast is like, okay, if peace is possible, how would it look like? How would it feel like? How would it smell? How would like the expansion in my heart and in your heart be? How can we speak about peace when one party is dominating another and dehumanizing another? So how can we speak truth? And maybe that's the question for you. How can we speak truth to power without dehumanizing the other? How can we still hold that vision for peace? And if we can, how would it look like?
Yeah, those are really great questions. And actually, I feel like for me, in some ways, this war has made it worse, has made those conversations harder in some ways. Only realized recently how many friends I've lost during this war. I was like having this conversation with my husband, and he was sharing with me that he has a couple of friends who will like tell him that they hate what I write. Like, oh, I can't read what your wife writes and things like that. And it was really painful for me to hear. Like there were friends and family members who just aren't willing to even engage with the possibility that there's something really terrible happening here. And what really worries me is that now that like, oh, the hostages are back, now Israel is back to, okay, healing or whatever that means, it's going back to October 7th. And I'm really concerned that Israelis, all they want to talk about now is, okay, October 7th, as opposed to really not wanting to talk about what's going on in Gaza. It was always a problem. It was always difficult to get Israelis to care about Palestinians. And now I feel like it's even harder. And this really worries me. It just really worries me. At the same time, though, just to your point about like hope and optimism, I do find comfort in how many people there are and how many amazing people there are doing this work. Yesterday, I went to the conference of the party. It's a Jewish Palestinian political party that aims to create a different reality. It's a country for all, which is something that I believe in very strongly. Like it really encapsulates what I believe in, which is that whoever is here should count equally, period. And there were some great people there. There are great people running that. And that's just one organization. We recently, the podcast, Women Ending War, we recently joined AllMep. which is the coalition of the Alliance for Middle East Peace. And there are 180 organizations in this coalition. And that gives me a lot of inspiration, a lot of hope. And there are like points of light. And it's, you're, like you said, you're navigating between the points of light and the things that are really disturbing. And you just got to hold on to that light. You got to hold on to it to keep going.
Yes, thank you for this. I feel like it's really the light in the darkness that we are going through very dark moment, not only in Palestine, Israel, but just collectively, and that the light that we are seeking is actually within us. And that's the only way that we can shine our light. And it sounds like out there far, oh my God, she doesn't know what's going on the ground. But I do believe that unless we have that anchor inside, there's no way we can continue living this life with all that, with the atrocity that are happening. And I share your concern about the denial and the inability of some, I don't think everybody, but some Israeli incapable of facing the reality of what's happening on the land. And I think, like, for me, already in 2016, when I co-created One Whole Piece with Dalit Eliyahu and started doing these workshops around conflict transformation from within, a lot of it was around how can we bring the Israeli public, whether it's Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Druze, or just the Israeli public that is bathing into this narrative of victimhood. How can we bring this public to take responsibility for what is being done in its own name? And how can we face this reality as an Israeli, as a Jewish on the land? Because I feel like there has been so many Israeli that left Israel after October 7, and that live, many of them are here in Costa Rica even, and elsewhere, but that keep this trauma of being Israeli and Jewish and what is being done in their name hard in their heart and have hard time living with it. So there's a constant denial of actually even referring to what's happening and just focusing on the little space in the in between so that we can keep our humanity. And I think that's a normal reaction. It's human because we want to keep believing. I think that it's a normal reaction of the human being, regardless of your Palestinian, Israeli, or who you are, just to deny the reality when the reality is so harsh. And the
Yeah.
reality is so harsh. And so the reality for right now for a Jewish Israeli is to hold this truth that in his or her name, a genocide
Yeah.
had happened against another people. Wrong plus wrong doesn't make right. And somehow we're constantly in this competition of suffering and of
Yeah.
narrative where when the Palestinians share about losing their family in Gaza or elsewhere or settler violence, you immediately have a response by an Israeli Jewish who's like, yeah, and my grandparent in the Holocaust, or I'm a survivor of the Holocaust, or bringing in what happened to them so that they can deny what is happening right now. And I feel that's the
Yeah.
main challenge in
Yes.
currently in the peace field.
Yes.
And that's why peace has lost its sacredness. Because how can you speak for on peace and you want to do a joint work when you're not even willing to sit in silence and holding
Right.
on the pain of
Right.
that Palestinian that has just lost 70 members of her family? How can you come to that and share about what your great grandfather lived? This tells me that you actually didn't even listen, that there's no space inside of you to hold such atrocity. And so you need to backfire with it with the atrocity of October 7. And so, as if the atrocity of October 7 can justify the atrocity that happened afterward. And there's no legitimization for any atrocity, regardless of when it happened. 1948, 67, 73, like it doesn't matter when it happened, it is atrocity of a human against another human. And I think for me, that's where I'm really challenged. And that's where the conversation comes is okay, how can I hold that truth, that pain, and bring expansion into my heart so that I can continue doing the work that I see I need to be doing? And the work that I see we all need to be doing is to hold this multiple truth without
Yeah.
denying, without the denial. The denial is so hurtful. And so within that context, how you that have gone, and I would love for you to share more about your background, because your journey of transformation is already just a path. I feel like a path or a journey that can showcase how do a person that is seeking truth and to stay in integrity, how does such a person deal with the current reality? So would you tell
So
us more
funny
about
because I've
that?
been, yeah, I've been thinking the same thing. First of all, everything you just described really speaks to me. I feel like you really described so much of, first of all, so much of my reality, which is exactly the kinds of conversations I have all the time. When you're trying to talk about the pains of Palestinians, 9 times out of 10, if you're trying to do it with the Jewish community, the answer is, oh, Jews are victims, and it becomes Jewish victimhood. And that inability to hold space for both is really at the core of what's going on here in terms of like limitations on empathy. I do have a bit of a journey. I did come from that world. I come from Brooklyn. I come from Flatbush, which is, I studied in the same yeshiva that, it, you know, Baruch Goldstein and Meir Kahana studied in. And so I come from that world. I really come from a world where we were taught that there's no such thing as Palestinians and or anything that people say the Arabs all lie. I came from that. We learned all that before we had ever met an actual Palestinian. We were experts. I feel terrible saying it to you a lot, even though I've said it to you out loud in the past, and it feels so ugly to me saying these things out loud. And so I want to just apologize to you for that. But I'm just sharing the reality of what's out. It's out there. It's out there. These things are out there. And we have Knesset members who will very clearly say all the time, death to the Arabs. We hear these like on a daily basis. We have leaders who are planning a complete Jewish takeover of Gaza, not caring that there are 2.2 million people living there. It's just, so we're living in this. This is the reality. And it's a world that I grew up in and I lived in for my first 35 or 40 years before I started to really question. And so why did I start? So I agree with you. That process of trying to understand what gets people to start questioning and start breaking open the indoctrination in order to embrace empathy, we need to understand how that process works. I'm just one person, okay? I'm not the only person. I think there are a whole bunch of other people who've done similar journeys. So yesterday at this conference of Kol Hazracha, I was chatting with Avram Borg, who's one of the founders of this party, and he has a very similar trajectory also. He came from the core of religious Zionism, and now he's, one of the greatest peace activists we have out there. I feel like I'm like on a similar journey. And so I was chatting with him and realizing like that we need to understand how this works. We need to understand what gets people to open up their hearts and lead with empathy. And so I feel like I'm working on this. My friend Jessica in Chicago, who I basically feel like I spent a lot of this war with, she's the person who like we check in with. We have a person who like knows where you are, knows what you're going through and all of that. So that's my friend Jessica in Chicago, who I just love with everything. Anyway, we talk about this all the time. She also goes to all kinds of protests in Chicago and really is a really great peace activist too. And one of the things that I'm working on with her is we're trying to answer this question. She's an educator, right? So she does a lot of this like training, a lot of training with people. And we're trying to work out like what would it take to take people who come from like the world that I come from and whose hearts are full of the kind of language. How do you get them to open up and humanize the other? It's about dehumanization, right? It's about the complete dehumanization of the other. I was brought up on dehumanizing the other and then blaming somebody else for it and then claiming victimhood and all of that. How do we get people to stop dehumanizing the other? I think that's the question for me now in this after war or the ceasefire, whatever it is that we're in. That is the question that is burning for me that I want to try to like unpack and work on with my friend Jessica. Maybe we're going to come up with something together, put together like a workshop on this.
Yes. I want to add to this, like for me, my question has been, why do people start fighting? That has been like the guiding question. Like, why would people hate each other? What makes a person hate another person, or what makes a person kill another person? And in discussion with a dear friend of mine, actually, Hannah, what she came up with and that I adopted as well is that there's four reasons why people fight. First one is fear. Second is ignorance. And fear comes from ignorance. And maybe I would actually start with ignorance, because when we're ignorant and not have the right information or have the wrong type of information, like a lot of the programming that we have in Israel, and then isolation, when we're living in isolation, thinking that we have the whole world against us, which brings us to fear and victimhood. And I feel like these four elements of ignorance, fear, isolation, and victimhood is like a Molotov cocktail that allow people to take that ingredients and justify any acts of violence and genocide and ethnic cleansing. And unless we bring information and see how a lot of the information we grew up with was forming our mind into
Yeah.
hating the other person, into
Yeah.
dehumanizing, as if the other is not me, as if the other is someone out there that is distinct and that is wanting to harm me. And one of the key element that I sense growing up, and also one of the reason that I started even one whole piece, was that unless we deal with the psychological root of the conflict, unless we address the fact that it's not two parties fighting each other, we need to put these two parties in a context that is geopolitical, that is involving a lot of different powers, and that was trying to repair one wrong with another wrong so that it makes it right. And it doesn't. And the thing is that when I say I'm Palestinian, a Jewish Israeli, and maybe not you, would hear, oh, she denies my existence.
Or enemy. Enemy. Yeah.
And the same for when the Israeli and the Jewish Zionists speak of Zionism, that denies my existence. That's the
Mhm.
perception. And so it's really important to understand that unless we deal with this core psychological roots of denial of existence of the other, like Israel was built on the denial of the existence of the Palestinian people. There's no way around it. There's no other word in which we can describe it, at least for me. At the same
Right.
time, the evolution, like right now, and I think that's also the challenge. So what do we do now? Okay, that happened then. What do we do now? What do we do with the people that are living on the land? And I think that's where the solution and the vision that the one land for all is offering is like whoever is on the land is on the land. But what happened with
Yeah.
the people that want to come back to the land? What happened with all these refugees that were kicked out in 1948 and haven't been allowed to come back? What do we do with
Mhm.
that when, in parallel to this denial, we have an invitation, an open invitation for any Jewish around the world to come back to Israel?
Painful. It's a very painful. How was your family, by the way? I wanted to ask you, speaking of like your family started out in Jaffa in 1947, 48, and then almost all of them went to Gaza except for your mother.
So my mom was born actually in May 1948, the
Or
4th of
your
May
mother's
1940.
mother, right? Yeah,
My
your
mother,
mother was
yeah.
born in that
In the middle of the Nakba, and that's the main reason why we're in Israel, because my grandmother stepped out of the boat of her family going fleeing to Gaza, and she came back to an abandoned house and gave birth to my mother and stayed, because immediately after that was May 4th, and in the midst of all the chaos and the war at the time, then Israel closed the border and nobody could leave or come back. And so all her family couldn't come back to Jaffa, and same for my father, all their family couldn't come back to Jaffa. So some of them stayed in Nablus, other in Gaza, other in Jordan. And so,
Would they want to come if they had that opportunity? Do they like dream about coming back to
yeah,
Jaffa?
yeah. Every single Palestinian you would speak to right now that has fled or that was kicked out of the land and wasn't allowed to come back has only one dream, and maybe with a key in their hand, is to come back. And that's how intergenerational trauma live in the body, is that every single descendant of that person want to come back at least to see for themselves the stories that they grew up on. And maybe once they're there, they're like, oh, okay, this is not the place I want to continue living, or this is not the place I want to come back. But I feel like there's something around the invitation that allow the choice and the freedom for that person to be allowed to go back home, even if that home right now is inhabited by someone else for the past 77 years.
Wow. And how's your family?
My mom's family, big chunk of them is dead under the rubble that you were referring to. And then part of the family fled to Egypt. And part of the family is still in Gaza and moving, trying to find a safe space in the difference between the south and the north. So my uncle's wife have direct family there, and she's in touch with them on a daily basis. And yeah, and the family in Israel is living as good as they can with total denial of what's happening politically, because I think that as a Palestinian in Israel right now, it's very challenging to engage with politics and be truthful to what's happening.
You had a really great analysis of what creates the hatred and then how do you get out of the hatred. People have generational trauma. I think that it was also a really important thing to talk about how intergenerational trauma affects people. For Jews, it's the Holocaust. For Palestinians, it's a lot of things. Jews also, it's a lot of things. It's hard to talk to American Jews right now also about anything other than anti-Semitism because it's all mixed in together. I don't know if you're following what's happening in New York, but with the election of Madmani, the election of Madmani has really created this massive rift among American Jews between those who are like, oh my God, catastrophe, anti-Semitism, end of Jewish life, da, 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 versus those who are like, the man is just calling for empathy. The man is saying very clearly he doesn't hate Jews, but he really wants justice for Palestinians. And he's trying to hold space for both of those things. And there are a lot of Jews who embrace that. There are a lot of Jews who are saying yes to that. And then the rest of the Jews, what? How did Jews become self-hating Jews and all that kind of stuff? It's pretty intense and in places pretty ugly. But it's really hard to talk about these things with Jews right now in America.
I think it's
So,
not, it's what you're speaking to, it's not just in America. I think in every single country, even in Europe, as soon as you speak towards holding empathy for the Palestinian or speaking truth to power, the interpretation has been, and I think that's part of the manipulation, that's part of the ignorance and the isolation, is that to equal what's happening in Gaza and with the Palestinian people to anti-Semit. If you are speaking towards that, it means that you're anti-Semit and you're hating Jews and you want to deny Jews. It goes back to what I'm saying about the fact that stating Palestinian identity denies the Israeli identity. That's the perception. And I didn't realize that until I had a chat with a dear friend here in Costa Rica, an Israeli Jewish. And she came to me honestly, she's like, Eva, when you say you're Palestinian, what do you mean? Like,
what is
because, yeah, she's, what do you mean? Because for me, when you say that, it feels like I don't exist anymore and I don't have the right to exist as Israeli. And I'm like, oh my God, thank you so much for asking me, because that's definitely not what I mean. I mean that as a Palestinian, I carry a culture and a language and an identity that has been here for generation. And I grew up in a state that denies this, the existence of this culture. And so I'm not denying your culture because I grew up actually in that state. I am Israeli. And my culture, my identity, my religion, my everything is Palestinian. And why can't we hold both identities at the same time? And the interesting thing is that the Israeli identity is screaming, oh my God, denying my identity. The Palestinians are denying my identity. And I feel like it's such a projection because that's what the Israeli are doing actually all the time from the very existence of Israel. It's denying that there's a Palestinian identity. It's denying that there's a Palestinian cause. It is denying that there's a Palestinian nation. Yet what we hear in the narrative everywhere is, oh my God, it's anti-Semitism. It's denying our existence as Israelis, denying our existence as Jewish. And so it really feels like there's no space to actually be and hold a truth because you're immediately denying that truth with something else that you want to deform.
so interesting about that conversation that you had with that Israeli woman where she said you just saying you're Palestinian like somehow is like an attack on her. I feel like I was brought up with that. I do feel like I was socialized into that. And it becomes this very emotional knee-jerk reaction, which then goes to Jewish identity. Like, oh, if you want to be a good Jew, then you have to understand that Palestinian identity is your enemy, that for Palestinians to exist, that's a threat to you. You have to hang on to that idea because it's defining for you and it's defining about safety, it's identity and it's also safety and it's just everything. You have to like train yourself to question those things in yourself. When you find yourself having these like strange knee-jerk reactions that as soon as you say them out loud, they're like, wait, that maybe doesn't make so much sense. But you have to be willing to have that conversation with yourself and say, oh, wait a second. I was brought up with that idea and I had that in me for a long time, but maybe that's really all wrong. It's hard. It's hard to do that work because it's like scary, right?
Yes,
It's scary
yes.
because it's, oh, but wait a second, but I'm supposed to be scared, right? Because if I don't hang on to this idea, then something bad is going to happen to me or my family or something. So I really have to hang on tight to this idea. And it's, what if you don't? It's hard
It's it,
work. I'm just saying,
it's
it's like it's internal work that's not so simple for people to do,
And
you
that's the
know?
first step. It is internal work and it's the first step. And I
Yeah,
think that's your first answer to your question. What gets people to open the heart and lead with empathy? I think first is the inner work, is the
yeah,
questioning, is really
yeah.
questioning what the narrative and asking oneself, is this true? I was brought up
This
with
is true.
all this. Is this true? And then sensing inside, is this true? And
Mm,
knowing the answer, yes or no, and then leading from that. And for me, the journey of transformation is an inner journey of transformation. So it's really, we're trying to do conflict resolution and conflict transformation outside there, but it's the only way that conflict transformation can happen is from within. Is really, how
mm,
can I transform the conflict from within? And that's what I call peace activation and soul-centered peace work. Because unless
mhm.
I'm able to activate peace inside of me and sit with the
Yeah,
trigger, and that's what
yeah.
we've done, that we've been through that.
Yes.
I
That's
think
one of the
like
things I quote you about all the time, where I say, yeah, Eva taught me that peace starts within. Peace outside starts with peace within. I quote that all the time. There's so much wisdom in there. There's like mountains of wisdom in understanding that. Mountains of wisdom. Mountains
because
of
then
wisdom.
I hold myself in the trigger. You can trigger me, but I don't need to blame you for that trigger because that trigger is on me. Just had a discussion with another Palestinian friend actually that was like triggered by me. And she's like, ah, you're speaking too much and there's too much wisdom and I don't find myself in it. And I'm like, wow, you're triggered. I'm receiving the feedback and I can sit in silence and listen to you. But what came through is this person is actually not owning her power. And when we don't own our power, we project on the person what we're not able to hold. And I feel like that's the same with denial, and that's the same with the fear, and it's all projection of our inner experience on the outside world. And so
Mhm.
then it's easier to blame you, shame you, and put guilt on you. And it's a guilt, I want to call it, it's a guilt-free ride to pollute the field. The field is clean, and the field is beyond right doing and wrongdoing. And in this field, I can meet you. I can meet you because I know that I do not actually hold the whole truth. And you know that you don't hold the whole truth. The only thing that each one of us is holding is our own truth, our own experience. I come to this with the experience of my own upbringing, of my family story, of what I've experienced and what I've been told and what I have been reading. And funnily enough, for me, I grew up in Israel. So I actually was formatted as an Israeli. I got formatted with the Hassamba story, with the perception of the Palestinian as a Falahin, as like a uneducated, ignorant, non-existent, and the Israeli youth, Tzabar, that is coming and reviving this land that didn't have people. Like I grew up on these stories. And I thought my whole childhood, I was like, ah, why don't I belong to that people? Why am I different? Why am I treated different? But I didn't at the time, I didn't even have the knowledge or the experience or the understanding that the people they were talking about was my family, was my community, was my people. And that's how hard and challenging the education system and the manipulation of information in Israel is. And it's not even targeted because all we target in this international development program is how can we change the education program of Palestinians that are hating Jews. We're not learning how are the Israeli education system, whether it's in Israel, even in the US, on which you were brought up, how they
Yeah.
are forming millions if not more, of people to hate Arabs and to hate Palestinian and to name
Yeah.
them as the enemy. And I think that's what has been justifying or allowing and enabling the genocide in Gaza. And I think that's really key to understand and
Yeah.
hold.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've really come to the same conclusions that it's not just the war, it's the rhetorical war. And this is also, and this is Netanyahu's specialty. Like, Netanyahu is the king of rhetoric. He's the
Mm,
king of the using language as manipulation. So we're living in that. We are absolutely living. We are living out the rhetorical war that then supports the physical violence. Yeah, I really see that very clearly. It's getting worse with Trump because like Trump is also the master of rhetoric for the sake of violence. He and Netanyahu do the same thing. They give their followers language. They like feed them language that supports violence. And we're living that out. We are
yeah.
absolutely living. I
That,
totally
yeah.
agree.
And that's not new. That's the same thing that
It's
happened
not
in the
new. I agree.
genocide in Rwanda. It's the same thing that happened in the Holocaust in
Yeah.
Germany. But I think that's
Yeah.
where you and many people like you and me have the power of the words to articulate in the midst of all this confusion and misinformation. Is there's such a duty and service to speak truth to power and frame things. And I love the way you do it, actually. I know that you said your husband gave you a feedback from his friend that they don't like what you write. I actually do love what you write, and we'll put it in the notes
Thank you.
of this podcast, because I feel like you are able to articulate both reality with such accuracy, because you also understand where you're coming from. What was your journey of transformation? And so you understand the language that they're using, be it Trump or Netanyahu or anybody else for that matter. Yeah.
It's not going to deter me. It will not deter
No,
me.
I know.
I
I'm
do
and I'm glad.
I do get lots of people writing to me all the time, like, "Why do you hate Jews so much? Why do you hate us?" Like one woman wrote to me, a woman who I thought we knew each other. She's an
Mm,
artist who I've written about, and she said, "Are you even Jewish? How could you write such hateful things?" I get lots of people telling me what I should and shouldn't write. So
yeah.
I'm just like at a point where it's like, I'm gonna write what I need to write and say what I need to
Yes.
say. I'm
Yeah.
done with letting other people tell me what to think. I'm really done with that. I've spent too much of my life
Mm,
spewing back things that other people told me I'm supposed to think, and I'm not doing that anymore.
yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not doing that
Good for
anymore.
you. Good for you, Elena. Elena,
That's
any
yes.
final thought, any contribution, anything that you would like to add before we close this?
Oh, it's really great chatting with you, and so much of what you said here was so validating. I feel very validated by our conversation that, yeah, this is the work.
Yeah.
The work of the inner work, the undoing our reactions, helping people to think differently from a place of compassion. That is absolutely work. And it's challenging. Oh my God, is it challenging? But that's the work. I feel very
Mm,
validated in that from this conversation.
thank you. Thank you for the work that you do, Ilana.
And you too, my friends, my beautiful sister,
All right.
Habibti. Mhm,
Habibti. All
mhm.
right. This is
Okay,
it.
we'll speak soon. Thank you for having
Speak
me.
soon. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, for feeling, and for holding space with us. If this episode moved you, please support the Peace is Possible podcast by subscribing, sharing it with friends, or posting it online. Every ripple counts. We'll be back next month with another conversation that dives deep into what it truly means to activate peace within and around us. To support the vision behind Peace Activation, visit peaceactivation.org and follow along on social media. You'll find both Peace Activation and me, Eva Dalak, across all platforms. Until next time, may you meet yourself and others with peace.